In this video, I'm going to explain the full lore of Dead Space 1. I'll be playing the game in the background, so sit back and relax. Dead Space doesn't start with a monster. It starts with a species that ran out of options. That species is us. By the year 2508, Earth is dying. Not dramatically, not all at once, just slowly, the way things usually end. Centuries of industrial extraction have stripped the planet to its bones. The soil is exhausted. The oceans are poisoned. The atmosphere is compromised enough that entire regions are effectively uninhabitable. Earth's population is somewhere in the billions, and those billions need energy, need raw materials, need metals and minerals and fuel, and Earth simply doesn't have enough left to give. This is the world Isaac Clarke was born into. This is the world everyone in Dead Space was born into. And understanding it matters, because everything that happens in this story, every death, every conspiracy, every horror aboard the Ishimura flows directly from one question: how far will humanity go to survive? The answer, it turns out, is further than you'd think. The solution humanity settled on was called planet cracking. It's exactly what it sounds like. You find a planet, ideally a dead one, no atmosphere, no ecosystem worth protecting. You send a specialized ship into orbit above it, and you literally tear it apart from the inside out using gravitational tethers and drilling arrays. You pull the raw materials up from the planet's mantle, process them in orbit, and ship the refined product back to Earth. It's brutal, industrial, and extraordinarily effective. A single successful crack can yield enough raw material to sustain a significant portion of Earth's population for years. The organization that made this possible was the Concordance Extraction Corporation, the CEC. Think of them as the defining corporation of the 26th century. In a world where Earth's governments are dependent on off-world resources to maintain any semblance of civilization, the CEC holds enormous leverage. They're not just a mining company. They're infrastructure, their survival. And with that leverage comes power. And with that power comes corruption. But we'll get to that. The CEC's flagship achievement, their first and most celebrated planet cracker, was the USG Ishimura. Built in the early 24th century and still operational by 2508, the Ishimura is a genuinely staggering piece of engineering. It's enormous. Not spaceship, enormous. City, enormous. It's essentially a mobile industrial complex capable of housing over 1,300 crew members, sustaining them for years at a time, and processing the raw output of an entire planet's worth of extracted material. The Ishimura is old by 2508 standards, but it's been continuously upgraded and maintained, and it's still one of the most capable vessels in the CEC fleet. It's also, critically, the most famous. The Ishimura has a kind of legendary status in this world. It was humanity's first real answer to the resource crisis, the ship that proved planet cracking was possible. When people talk about what the CEC accomplished for mankind, the Ishimura is the symbol they reach for, which makes what happened to it all the more devastating. But before the Ishimura, before the CEC, before any of it, there was something else. Something that predates all of human civilization, waiting on a planet that humanity wouldn't reach for centuries. Something that would eventually be called the Black Marker. The Black Marker was discovered on Earth, right here, on our own planet, buried in the Chicxulub crater in the Gulf of Mexico, the same crater left by the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. The discovery was made sometime in the 21st century, and the moment it was found, it was immediately classified. The government, whatever governing body was in power at the time, sealed the site, buried the information, and began secretly studying the object. What they found was something no one could explain. The marker is an enormous structure, a curved obelisk covered in dense, intricate symbols, a script that appears to encode some form of mathematical or biological information. Nobody built it. It isn't made of any material that occurs naturally on Earth. It predates human civilization by an almost incomprehensible margin, and it does things. The marker emits a signal. You can't hear it, you can't measure it with conventional instruments in any meaningful way, but your brain can receive it, and what it does to your brain is deeply, profoundly wrong. People who spend extended time near the marker start experiencing symptoms. At first it's minor: insomnia, irritability, a creeping sense of unease that they can't quite shake. But the longer the exposure, the worse it gets. The hallucinations start, visions of dead loved ones, messages that feel urgent and meaningful but don't quite resolve into coherent language. Then comes the paranoia, the dementia, the violence. People near the marker begin hurting each other. The researchers studying it lose their minds slowly, then completely. The facility around the black marker becomes dangerous, and the government keeps it quiet because the alternative is admitting they found something they can't control and can't explain. There's something else the marker does, something the early researchers noticed and didn't fully understand at the time. In the presence of the marker, dead organic matter reanimates, not in any spiritual sense biologically. The signal from the marker appears to interact with recently deceased tissue, triggering some kind of transformation at the cellular. What comes back isn't alive in any way that we recognize. It isn't the person who died. Whatever the marker does to a corpse, it produces something else entirely, something shaped for a purpose that has nothing to do with the person it used to be. The early researchers called this phenomenon the necromorph effect, and they buried that finding alongside everything else. The government kept the black marker secret for decades, but secrets that size are hard to hold. The man who exposed it partially, imperfectly, and at the cost of his own life was named Michael Altman. Altman was a scientist, one of the researchers who had been brought in to study the marker, and he was one of the few people who came away from that experience with his mind more or less intact. What he didn't come away with was silence. Altman went public. Not completely. He didn't have access to the full scope of what the government knew, but enough. He published findings. He spoke about the discovery. He insisted that whatever was buried in the Chicxulub crater represented something transformative, something that humanity needed to confront openly rather than hide behind closed doors. He framed the marker in terms that were simultaneously scientific and almost spiritual as evidence of something larger than humanity, as a sign of what he called convergence, of a greater unity between all living things that the marker somehow represented. The government, predictably, moved to silence him. What they didn't anticipate was what happened after Altman was killed, made to look like an accident, buried quietly. But by that point, his ideas had already spread. A movement formed around his memory, around the marker, around the concept of convergence. They call themselves the Church of Unitology, and within a generation, they were one of the largest and most powerful religious organizations on earth. Unitology, at its surface, is not obviously sinister. It presents itself as a faith that takes seriously the question of what comes next after death, after humanity as it currently exists. It teaches that death is not an ending, but a transformation, that the marker represents a kind of cosmic invitation toward a higher state of being. The faithful call this state convergence, the moment when all life achieves unity, transcends its individual limitations, and becomes something greater. Altman, in Unitologist theology, is a martyr, a man killed for the truth he tried to share. His death is proof of the church's righteousness and the establishment's fear. What ordinary Unitologists don't know what the rank and file of the church genuinely believe, with complete sincerity, is that they've been profoundly deceived about what that convergence actually looks like. The inner leadership of Unitology knows the highest ranking members, the ones with access to the church's real doctrine, understand what the marker signal is actually calling for. They've seen what happens near a marker. They've seen what the transformation produces. And rather than running from it, they welcome it. They want it. They believe the mass reanimation of the dead, the necromorph outbreak, is not a catastrophe. It's the beginning of convergence. It's the marker doing exactly what it's supposed to do. This distinction matters enormously as we trace what happens to the Ishimura, because the Church of Unitology, over the course of the 24th and 25th centuries, has become extraordinarily wealthy and politically connected. And one of the places they've planted their influence quietly and systematically is inside the CEC. Meanwhile, the government, which by 2508 has consolidated into a body called EarthGov, has not been idle with what they know about the marker. The black marker, they eventually concluded, couldn't be destroyed. They didn't fully understand what it was or what it wanted, but they understood that its existence was both a threat and potentially an asset. The threat was obvious: the signal, the violence, the reanimation effect. The asset was harder to articulate, but it had to do with energy. The marker emits enormous amounts of what researchers classified as marker energy, a form of power output that doesn't fit neatly into existing scientific frameworks, but is real and measurable and staggering in its scale. If you could harness that energy, the implications for a resource-starved civilization were extraordinary. So EarthGov did what governments do with things they can't destroy and won't release. They studied it, they experimented, and eventually they made copies. The red markers named for their color, which differs from the original black marker's dark surface, are artificial reconstructions. They were built using the encoded information within the marker's script, which EarthGov's researchers eventually managed to partially decode. A red marker is not the same as the black marker. It's smaller, it's less powerful, and it behaves somewhat differently. Critically, a red marker appears to have a suppressive effect under the right conditions, in the right proximity to certain kinds of necromorph activity. It can slow or halt the transformation process. The theory was that the markers were a kind of lock and key, that the red markers, properly placed, could contain the very phenomena the black marker seemed to generate. This theory was not reliably tested before implementation. EarthGov's track record with markers, in hindsight, is one of catastrophic overconfidence. But catastrophic overconfidence is something of a theme in this story. One such red marker ended up on the planet Aegis VII. And that is where everything truly begins. Aegis VII is not a remarkable planet. It's a cold, remote rock in a distant system, chosen by the CEC as a candidate for planet cracking because its geological surveys suggested abundant mineral deposits in the mantle. A colony was established there, the Aegis VII colony, a working settlement of miners and support staff tasked with preparing the site and handling the initial phases of extraction, while the Ishimura was dispatched to perform the actual crack. But before the Ishimura arrives, something happens in the colony. The colonists find the marker. It's sitting on a pedestal in the surface of the planet, not buried, not hidden, just there, large, curved, covered in symbols. And the moment it's found, the colonists near it start experiencing the now familiar progression. The insomnia, the headaches, the creeping paranoia, the hallucinations. But the knowledge of what's happening, the context that EarthGov has spent decades suppressing, isn't available to these people. They don't know what a marker is. They don't know what it does. They just know that something on this planet is wrong, and they can't quite articulate what it is. And the wrongness is getting worse. The unitologists among the colonists, however, know exactly what they've found, because the Church of Unitology has been tracking the locations of known marker sites for years. They've been maneuvering people into position on colonies, on ships, in administrative roles, precisely for moments like this. When the marker is found on Aegis VII, it triggers a plan that has been in motion for longer than most of the people executing it have been alive. Word reaches the church's leadership. The leadership reaches out through its network within the CEC. And arrangements are made to ensure that the right people are in the right places when the Ishimura arrives. The Ishimura sets out for Aegis VII with a crew of over 1,300 people. Most of them have no idea what's waiting. They've been told this is a routine planet crack, technically true in the sense that the Ishimura has done this dozens of times before, but a lie in every other sense, because the people running this mission have other priorities. The captain of the Ishimura is a man named Benjamin Mathias. He's a devout unitologist. He has been personally selected for this position by the church's leadership and placed here by the CEC's Executive Director of Colonial Mining Operations, a man named Warren Eckhart, who is also a unitologist, and who has spent years quietly seeding the CEC's colonial operations with church members. Eckhart isn't hiding in the shadows on this mission either. He's aboard the Ishimura himself, in an administrative capacity, to personally oversee what the church hopes to accomplish. The goal is straightforward: retrieve the marker from Aegis VII, bring it aboard the Ishimura, and transport it to Earth. The church wants the marker. They believe convergence is coming, and they want to be the ones who deliver it. What they're not accounting for, what no one is fully accounting for, is the scale of what the marker actually does when it's set loose among a population with nowhere to run. The Ishimura enters orbit above Aegis VII, and the situation on the colony is already deteriorating. The hallucinations have progressed. There have been deaths, colonists who turned violent in the grip of the marker's influence and were killed, or killed themselves, or killed each other. A foul organic growth called the corruption has begun appearing in the colony's ventilation systems, a sludge-like biological material that nobody can explain and nobody has the presence of mind to properly contain. The colony is still technically functional, but it is fraying. Captain Matthias issues a no-fly order the moment the Ishimura arrives. Nothing leaves. Nothing enters. No communications out that aren't authorized by him personally. For the crew who don't know what's happening, this is confusing. For the crew who do know, the unitologists embedded throughout the ship, it's protocol. For anyone trying to alert the outside world to what's happening on Aegis VII, it's a death sentence. The marker is brought up from the colony surface and loaded onto the Ishimura. This is the moment everything accelerates. The effect of the marker at close range inside a closed ship with nowhere for the signal to dissipate is dramatically more intense than anything that happened on the colony surface. The Ishimura's crew begins exhibiting symptoms within hours. The insomnia spreads through the ship like a contagion, then the headaches, then the hallucinations. Crew members see dead relatives. They hear voices speaking in patterns that feel meaningful. They stop sleeping, they stop eating regularly. Their decision-making deteriorates. Their emotional regulation collapses. People who were stable professionals 3 days ago are now erratic, paranoid, violent. Two people aboard the Ishimura understand what's happening better than anyone else. The first is Dr. Terence Kyne, the ship's chief science officer, a brilliant, deeply conscientious man who has done enough research into marker phenomena to recognize what he's watching. The second is Dr. Challis Mercer, the ship's chief medical officer and a committed unitologist who knows exactly what's happening because he's been briefed on it and he believes in it completely. These two men respond to the same situation in opposite ways. Kyne is horrified. He begins documenting the progression, trying to understand the mechanism, and most importantly, trying to stop it. He approaches Captain Matthias and argues calmly at first and then desperately that the marker needs to be returned to Aegis VII immediately, that whatever it is, it's doing something catastrophic to the crew and it needs to be isolated, that the mission needs to be aborted. Matthias refuses. He refuses because he's not running a mining operation. He's running a delivery. Every person dying in the corridors of the Ishimura is acceptable collateral damage against the goal of getting the marker to Earth. Matthias has the faith. He has the mission. He has the authority. And he uses all three to override every objection Kyne raises. Mercer, meanwhile, has begun conducting his own work. He has a small group of loyal unitologists and a larger group of crew members whose minds have been sufficiently compromised by the marker that they'll follow orders without asking uncomfortable questions. Mercer has long believed that the necromorph transformation isn't something to be prevented. It's something to be studied, understood, and ultimately embraced. In his view, the crew members showing symptoms aren't victims. They're participants in the beginning of something sacred. His role, as he sees it, is to facilitate that process, to help it along, to learn. Mercer's medical bay becomes something else entirely during this period. He has access to the bodies of crew members who have already died from violence, from self-inflicted wounds, from the cascading physical effects of extended marker exposure, and he begins experimenting on them, trying to understand and control the transformation, trying to produce specific results. His notes from this period are lucid and methodical and completely insane in the gap between their clinical precision and their content. He refers to his subjects with care. He documents their changes in detail. He believes he is doing holy work. What he's doing is creating necromorphs. Among the Ishimura's engineering staff is a man named Jacob Temple. He's not a unitologist. He's just an engineer trying to survive in a ship that's coming apart around him. Mercer forces Temple into his orbit, first by using Temple's technical skills for repairs to equipment in the medical bay, then by leveraging the increasing chaos aboard the ship to make Temple's cooperation feel like the only path to survival. Temple becomes a kind of reluctant witness to what Mercer is doing, unable to stop it, documenting what he can in the hope that someone eventually finds the records and understands what happened here. Temple's audio logs are some of the most harrowing fragments of the Ishimura story, not because they describe extreme violence, though they do, but because they describe a man who is completely helpless, watching something monstrous unfold, and knowing that his documentation is probably the only thing of value he can still offer. Back on the ship's command structure, the situation with Captain Matthias reaches its breaking point. Kyne has watched the crew deteriorate for long enough. He has concluded that Matthias is not just wrong, he is dangerous, that his singular focus on the mission and his refusal to acknowledge the scale of what's happening makes him actively complicit in the death of everyone aboard. Kyne attempts to have Matthias relieved of command on medical grounds, arguing accurately that Matthias's judgment has been compromised and that the ship needs new leadership. The confrontation between Kyne and Matthias ends badly. During the physical altercation, Kyne accidentally kills him. This is not a clean assassination. It's a panicked, desperate act that Kyne clearly does not intend, and which shatters something in him along with Matthias's life. The guilt stays with Kyne. It shapes everything he does afterward. A man who wanted to save the ship ends up haunted by the fact that the blood on his hands is the captain's. With Matthias gone, the Ishimura has no functioning command authority. The remaining senior officers are either dead, compromised beyond functioning, or part of Mercer's faction. The ship goes dark, organizationally. People stop receiving orders. People stop following orders. The crew that remains alive splinters into those trying to survive, those who have lost their minds entirely, and those who are following Mercer's increasingly unhinged directives. On the planet below, the situation has collapsed entirely. The planet crack was initiated before Matthias was killed. He got that much done. And during the process, a blackout swept through the entire colony. In the darkness and confusion following that blackout, the necromorphs emerged. Not gradually, all at once, as if a switch had been thrown. The colony, already destabilized by weeks of marker exposure, is overrun within hours. The necromorphs spread through the habitat modules, through the tunnels, through every connected space. The colonists who aren't killed outright are transformed. The colony stops being a place where humans live and becomes something else. Deep in the rock beneath Aegis VII, something ancient stirs. Something that was there before the colonists arrived, before the CEC's geological surveys, possibly before humanity left Earth. The hive mind, a vast ancient entity connected to the necromorph transformation, the original intelligence behind what the markers are designed to produce awakens. It's not clear how long it's been dormant. It's not clear how many times this has happened before, on how many other planets, in how many other systems. What's clear is that the marker has done exactly what it was built to do. It gathered organic material. It transformed it. And now there is a hive mind beneath the surface of Aegis VII, and the necromorphs on both the planet and the Ishimura are connected to it. Kyne figures this out. Not completely, not the full cosmic scope of what the hive mind represents, but enough. He concludes that the hive mind's presence is what's driving the necromorph activity, and that the marker is the key. His theory, which he arrives at through a combination of research, logical deduction, and increasing amounts of marker-induced delusion, is that returning the marker to its original pedestal on Aegis VII will pacify the hive mind. That there's something about the marker being in its proper place that stabilizes the situation. He calls this the marker's suppressive effect. And he's not entirely wrong, we'll get to that, but his reasoning is as much mysticism as science at this point, because the marker has been working on his mind too. Kyne has begun seeing his dead wife, Amelia, not as a manifestation of grief, as a presence, a voice, something that seems to speak to him with intelligence and intention. The marker is using his love for her to communicate with him, to direct him, to keep him moving toward an outcome that serves the marker's purposes rather than his own. Kyne knows on some level that what he's seeing isn't real. He says it sometimes in his audio logs, that he knows she's dead, that he knows this is the marker. And then he talks to her anyway, because the alternative is accepting that he's alone in the dark with no guide and no compass, and that's worse. He decides the only way out is to put the marker back. The Ishimura sends out a distress beacon. This part is almost accidental. The automated distress system activates as the ship's systems fail from neglect and damage, and there's no one in command authority who thinks to shut it off or who cares to. The signal goes out, it's received, and the CEC dispatches a repair ship called the USG Kellion to investigate. Aboard the Kellion is a team of personnel selected for exactly this situation, not the situation as it actually is, because no one sending the Kellion has any idea what they're sending their people into, but the situation as it appears to be: a damaged ship, possibly a distress call, a repair job. The team includes Security Chief Zach Hammond, a competent, experienced officer who is going to be deeply out of his depth for the entire time he survives, and a systems engineer named Isaac Clarke. Isaac Clarke is not a remarkable man by the standards of his time. He's good at his job, he's quiet, he carries his grief close to his chest, and there is grief specific and recent. His partner, Dr. Nicole Brennan, is the chief medical officer aboard the Ishimura. He has received a message from her before the Kellion departed, a brief video in which she tells him she loves him and says she's sorry. The message is fragmented, the context unclear. Isaac doesn't know what she's apologizing for. He just knows she's on that ship and he needs to find her. There is something else about Isaac Clarke worth noting here. Something that won't become fully apparent until much later, but that matters from the moment he sets foot on the Ishimura. The marker seems to find Isaac interesting. Specifically, the marker's signal appears to affect him differently than it affects others, not harmlessly, but differently. He still sees things. He still hears things. But where other crew members were driven toward violence and breakdown, the marker seems to be trying to use Isaac for something, to point him somewhere, to work through him rather than simply on him. The reason, it turns out, has to do with Nicole. Also aboard the Kellion is a woman named Kendra Daniels. She's officially a computer specialist, part of the repair team. She is actually an operative for EarthGov, sent on this mission under orders that have nothing to do with rescuing the Ishimura's crew. EarthGov has known about the marker on Aegis 7 for some time. They know roughly what it is, they know what it does, and they have concluded that the current situation, a unitology-driven attempt to transport a marker to Earth, cannot be allowed to succeed. Their response to this conclusion is the kind of response that governments give when they want a problem to disappear. Send someone in, acquire the intelligence and the object, and then make sure nothing survives to complicate the narrative. Kendra's mission is to secure the marker data, not the marker itself necessarily, but the research, the documentation, everything Kyne and Mercer and the Ishimura systems have collected, and deliver it to EarthGov. What happens to the people still alive on the Ishimura is not her priority. There is also a second element to EarthGov's plan. A military ship called the USM Valor has been dispatched to the Aegis 7 system with orders to destroy the Ishimura if necessary. Clean slate, no evidence. The Valor will handle the final cleanup once Kendra has what she needs. Kendra has been watching Isaac for years, incidentally. Not personally, she's a professional, not a stalker, but she's been tracking his file, aware of who he is and why he might be significant to this situation. There's a belief within EarthGov's research division that exposure to the marker affects some people differently than others. That certain individuals, for reasons not fully understood, have a kind of compatibility with the marker signal. Not immunity, but something more like a channel, a way of processing the signal that makes them useful. Isaac Clarke may be one of these people, and that usefulness is something EarthGov wants to study. The Kellion docks with Ishimura under chaotic circumstances. The landing doesn't go cleanly. People die. And almost immediately, the survivors Isaac, Kendra, and Hammond are separated from the rest of their team and plunged into a ship that is dark, damaged, and full of things that want to kill them. Isaac's journey through the Ishimura is, on one level, a series of engineering problems. The ship's systems have been failing for weeks with no one maintaining them. The gravity systems are inconsistent. The oxygen generation is compromised in multiple sections. The medical bay is a charnel house. The engineering deck has been partially destroyed by an explosion. The bridge is inaccessible. One by one, Isaac is directed toward each failing system, told by Hammond, via communications link, what needs to be fixed and why, with the understanding that getting the ship operational enough to call for help is the only viable exit. On another level entirely, Isaac's journey through the Ishimura is a descent into the truth of what happened there, and into the marker's ongoing attempt to shape him toward a specific outcome. He finds the audio logs, the crew's logs, Kyne's research logs, Temple's desperate documentation, Mercer's clinical notes on his experiments. Each one is a piece of the picture, and Isaac collects them the way you collect fragments of a story you're not sure you want to know the ending of. He learns about Matthias. He learns about the marker's arrival. He learns about the progression of the outbreak, how quickly it happened, how completely it consumed the crew, how little anyone in authority did to stop it when stopping it was still possible. He learns about Mercer and what the medical bay became, and what happened to the people Mercer used. He does not, for a long time, accept that Nicole is dead. The marker won't let him. The signal has found its way into Isaac's mind and located the thing he loves most, the same way it found Amelia for Kyne, and it uses Nicole the way a hand uses a puppet. Isaac sees her throughout the ship. He hears her voice. He receives what appear to be messages and directions from her, pointing him toward specific locations, warning him away from specific dangers. Some of what the Nicole hallucination tells him is accurate. Some of it is self-serving, serving the marker's agenda, that is, not Isaac's. The boundary between the two is impossible for Isaac to see clearly from inside it. He encounters Mercer directly more than once. Mercer is still alive, still mobile, still committed to his work. In the encounters between them, Mercer is not hostile in the way a simple villain would be. He's evangelical. He's trying to make Isaac understand. He genuinely believes that what he's been doing in the medical bay is sacred work, that the necromorphs are the next stage of human existence, that the convergence the church has promised is happening right now on this ship, and below them, on Aegis 7 and Isaac Clarke, is fighting against his own salvation. Mercer is not stupid. He was, before the marker got to him, a skilled and intelligent physician. That intelligence is still there, still operational, running in service of something that has gone catastrophically wrong. Kyne, when Isaac finds him, is quieter, more broken. He has the plan return the marker to Aegis 7, and he has the marker's apparition of Amelia to reinforce it. And he has enough remaining scientific rigor to articulate the logic behind it, even if the logic is shaky. He asks Isaac to help him. Isaac, who is working with fragments of information and trying to survive moment to moment, agrees. The USM Valor arrives in the Aegis 7 system. The Valor is a military warship, well armed and crewed by people who have been told almost nothing about what they're sailing into. EarthGov has given the Valor's command a sanitized version of the situation. Rogue CEC vessel, potential biohazard. Approach with caution and prepare for potential engagement. What the Valor's crew has not been told is that the Ishimura is not the source of the danger, that the danger is something that has already spread to Aegis 7's orbit, that the necromorphs are not contained to the Ishimura, that any contact with the biological material from the planet's surface or the ship should be treated as an extinction-level hazard. The Valor makes contact with the infected zone and is boarded. The necromorphs spread through the warship with terrifying efficiency. The Valor, a heavily armed military vessel with a professional crew, is overrun in hours. And then the Valor, with its dead crew and its new passengers, crashes into the underside of the Ishimura. The impact is catastrophic. Sections of the Ishimura are destroyed. Systems that were barely holding on are knocked offline entirely. And the necromorph population on the Ishimura increases substantially, because everything that was on the Valor is now on the Ishimura too. Isaac survives this. He's been through enough at this point that surviving one more catastrophic event feels almost routine, which is itself a sign of how much the Ishimura has changed him. The marker has been moved during all of this multiple times. Kyne's plan requires getting it onto a shuttle and sending it back down to Aegis VII, back to the pedestal from which it was taken, where his research suggests it will pacify the hive mind. Hammond has been working on securing a shuttle. Isaac has been working on the systems needed to make a descent possible. The plan is desperate and imperfect, but it's the only plan anyone has. Then Kendra moves. She's been watching. She's been calculating. She waited until Kyne had done the hard work of identifying the marker's location and getting it loaded onto the executive shuttle, and then she kills him. Not in a dramatic confrontation, cleanly, efficiently, the way a trained operative does something that needs doing. Kyne is dead. The marker is on the shuttle, and Kendra takes off with it, heading not toward Aegis VII and the pedestal, but away out of the system, toward the rendezvous point where EarthGov is waiting. What Kendra doesn't know is that EarthGov's plan has its own failure mode, and she's about to hit it. The marker transmits data. Something in the signal that EarthGov has been studying the encoded information in its surface script functions as a kind of broadcast. And when the marker is transported away from the Aegis VII system, it interrupts something that was in a delicate balance. The hive mind, which had been dormant beneath the surface, becomes active in a new way. The planet itself, Aegis VII, which has been geologically destabilized by the planet crack, begins to fail. Isaac, with the shuttle gone and the ship falling apart around him, manages to get to the surface. And on the surface, in the shadow of the ancient thing waking up beneath the rock, he confronts the hive mind directly. The hive mind is enormous. The word enormous doesn't quite cover it, but language tends to fail at this scale. It's a creature that exists in the space between the physical and the conceptual. It's the animating intelligence behind the necromorph transformation. The entity that the marker's signal was designed to feed and grow. It's not a predator in any simple sense. It's not hungry for Isaac specifically. It's simply following a process that is ancient and vast and has probably played out on other planets with other species before humanity was anything more than tree-dwelling primates. The hive mind is the end state, the thing the marker was always building toward. Isaac kills it. Against all reasonable probability, against all logical expectation, Isaac Clarke, a systems engineer from Earth with a plasma cutter and several weeks of the worst experiences a human being can have, kills the hive mind. The creature dies. Aegis VII, no longer stable, begins breaking apart. Isaac gets to the shuttle. Kendra is there, waiting. The marker's absence has disrupted her extraction timeline, and she needs the shuttle too. And in the moment before whatever comes next, she tells him. She tells him what she knows about Nicole. Nicole Brennan was already dead when the Kellion docked with the Ishimura. She died before Isaac arrived. Her death was not the result of necromorph attack, though the ship was already compromised when it happened. She took her own life in the medical bay, overwhelmed by what she had witnessed, what she had been unable to stop, what she knew was coming. The message she sent to Isaac, the fragmented video, the apology was her goodbye. She was saying sorry for leaving. She was saying sorry for what he was going to find. Everything Isaac saw of Nicole on the Ishimura was the marker. The marker used his love for her as an operational tool, directing him, motivating him, keeping him moving toward outcomes that served its own purposes. The marker needed Isaac to do things it couldn't do directly. It needed him to engage with the ship's systems, to push through situations a person with no guidance would never have survived. Nicole was the hook it used to keep him functional and pointed in the right direction. Kendra is killed by a necromorph before she can do anything with this information. Isaac escapes in the shuttle. What follows is arguably the most important moment of the entire first game. And it happens with no enemy to fight and no system to repair and no one telling Isaac what to do next. He's in the shuttle. He's alone. He's watching Aegis VII disintegrate through the viewport. And he plays Nicole's message, the real one, the original, and watches his partner say goodbye to him in a ship she knew was already dying. The message was not the guidance he received throughout the Ishimura. That was the marker's version, edited, redirected, used. This is the real thing. Nicole telling him the truth about what was happening, Nicole apologizing, Nicole loving him imperfectly and completely at the end. And then the shuttle's cockpit floods with light, and he sees her again. Nicole, right there with him, reaching for him, and Isaac screams. It doesn't stop. The marker got into Isaac Clarke in ways that surviving the hive mind doesn't fix. The signal is still in him. Whatever the marker does to a brain that's compatible with it, that can receive and process and be shaped by it, it has done to Isaac, and it's not done with him yet. The Nicole he sees in the final moments of Dead Space isn't a ghost and isn't his grief. It's evidence that the next chapter of the story has already begun, before the credits roll, before the rescue ships arrive, before anyone official decides what to make of what Isaac Clarke just survived. He did everything right. He fixed the ship, he killed the monster, he escaped the planet, and he is not okay. He will not be okay. The marker doesn't let go of the people it finds useful, and Isaac Clarke is one of the most useful people the marker has ever found. There's a layer to all of this that the first game leaves mostly in the background, something that becomes more explicit in the sequels, but that's woven into every element of what we've just traced. The question of what the markers actually are. They're not random alien artifacts. They're not the creation of some benevolent species that wanted to share its knowledge. The markers are an engineered extinction mechanism. Their purpose, the purpose encoded in every symbol on their surface, in every frequency of the signal they emit, in every transformation they trigger in dead organic matter, is convergence. And convergence is not transcendence in any sense a living being would recognize as positive. What the marker calls convergence is the complete transformation of all organic life in a region into necromorph material, which the hive mind then consumes and incorporates. The marker gathers the organic, transforms it, feeds it to the hive mind, and then the hive mind generates more marker seeds sent out into the universe toward other planets with other organic populations. The cycle repeats. The hive minds grow, the markers spread. It's a pattern, an old one. The symbols on the marker surface aren't just scientific data, they're a blueprint. And the blueprint is for this process, repeated endlessly across the universe. Every marker that has ever existed, every red marker that EarthGov built in its catastrophic overconfidence, every necromorph outbreak on every colony, all of it is steps in the same direction, the same ending. The unitologists who welcomed convergence weren't wrong that it was coming. They were just wrong about what it meant. They thought it meant ascension. They thought they were being invited to become something greater. The marker doesn't offer that. What the marker offers is not transcendence, it is consumption. The Church of Unitology built a religion around the most effective recruiting tool a predatory intelligence has ever devised. The promise that death isn't the end, that transformation awaits, that the signal calling to them is divine. It wasn't wrong that the signal was calling. It was catastrophically wrong about why. Michael Altman, the man they made a saint of, the martyr at the center of their faith, understood this. In his original research, before EarthGov killed him and before the church repackaged his memory, Altman was not describing convergence as something to be sought. He was describing it as something to be understood in order to be stopped. The church took a warning and turned it into a gospel. The government took a discovery and turned it into a weapon. And 1,300 people died on a ship in the Aegis 7 system because both of those institutions were too compromised by their own interests to do the one thing that might have prevented it: tell the truth. That's what Dead Space is. Underneath the monsters and the body horror and the survival mechanics, it's a story about what happens when the truth about something dangerous gets buried by the people who are supposed to protect us from it. The Ishimura didn't have to happen. Not because the marker isn't dangerous, it is absolutely and irreversibly, but because the danger was known. It was documented. It was covered up and managed and classified and kept from the people who needed it most, until it couldn't be contained anymore. And then 1,300 people died in the dark, and one man made it out the other side with something in his head that isn't going to let him go. Isaac Clarke survived Dead Space. He survived the Ishimura. He killed a god with a plasma cutter and flew away from an exploding planet. He didn't escape. Nobody does.